In a small, peaceful village nestled between rolling hills, there was a school called Brightwood Academy. The school was known for its brilliant teachers who loved their students and worked tirelessly to help them learn and grow. Among these teachers was Mrs. Eliza, a kind and patient woman who had been teaching for over 30 years. Her classroom was always full of laughter, creativity, and knowledge. But recently, something strange had started happening in Mrs. Eliza's classroom. The students, who once adored her, had begun to ignore her lessons. It all began with a group of children who thought they knew everything. At the center of this group were two students, Max and Clara. Max was a bright boy, but had become overconfident and disrespectful. He often interrupted Mrs. Eliza during lessons and joked with his friends instead of paying attention. Clara, who was equally smart, would roll her eyes at Mrs. Eliza's instructions and whisper to her friends, mocking the teacher's old-fashioned ways. Other students, seeing Max and Clara's behavior, began to join in. They whispered during lessons, giggled at Mrs. Eliza's mistakes, and sometimes even ignored her completely. The once lively classroom now felt cold and chaotic. Mrs. Eliza, though hurt, continued to teach with all her heart, hoping her students would realize their mistakes. One day, Mrs. Eliza decided to teach her students a different kind of lesson. She brought a jar filled with small seeds to class. "Today," she said, "we are going to plant these seeds and watch them grow. Each of you will take care of your own plant." The students, curious about the activity, eagerly planted their seeds in small pots. Mrs. Eliza instructed them on how to water and care for the seeds. "If you follow my instructions carefully," she explained, "you will see your plants grow strong and beautiful." But Max and Clara laughed at the idea. "How hard can it be to grow a plant?" Max said dismissively. Clara smirked. "It's just dirt and water," she said. "We don't need her silly instructions." Over the next few weeks, most of the students followed Mrs. Eliza's guidance. They watered their plants daily, placed them in the sunlight, and even talked to them, as Mrs. Eliza had suggested. But Max and Clara ignored her advice. Max overwatered his plant, drowning it, while Clara left hers in a dark corner, forgetting to water it for days. When the day came to show their plants, the classroom was filled with beautiful green sprouts and flowers, except for Max and Clara's. Max's plant was wilted and brown, while Clara's seed had not sprouted at all. They looked at their classmates' healthy plants in embarrassment. Mrs. Eliza walked over to their pots and gently said, "Do you see what happens when you don't listen and respect the guidance you are given? Just like these plants needed care and attention, so do your minds. By ignoring lessons and mocking others, you stop your own growth." Max and Clara lowered their heads, realizing their mistake. They felt ashamed of how they had treated Mrs. Eliza and the example they had set for their classmates. That afternoon, Max and Clara stayed behind after class. They approached Mrs. Eliza, who was cleaning the blackboard. "We're sorry, Mrs. Eliza," Max said, his voice trembling. "We've been so disrespectful, and we didn't realize how much we were missing." Clara nodded, tears in her eyes. "We thought we knew everything, but we were wrong. Will you forgive us?" Mrs. Eliza smiled warmly. "Of course, my dear children. Learning from our mistakes is one of the most important lessons of all. I'm proud of you for realizing it." From that day on, Max and Clara became model students. They listened attentively, participated eagerly, and even helped their classmates. The classroom slowly returned to its warm, joyful atmosphere. The other students, inspired by Max and Clara's transformation, also started showing more respect to Mrs. Eliza. Years later, when Max and Clara had grown up and become successful in their careers, they often looked back on their time in Mrs. Eliza's class. They realized that the seeds they had planted that day were more than just plants. They were lessons about respect, humility, and the value of learning. And so, The students of Brightwood Academy carried Mrs. Eliza's wisdom with them, teaching others that respect for teachers is the foundation of true growth and success.